Hi there. Welcome to another in our series of watercolor techniques, an ongoing series. In this session, we're going to focus on reflections. We have grandson Levi behind the camera, and he's going to record the actions that evolve over the next few minutes. Reflections are an important subject. They're an ephemeral or a fleeting condition. And in the image I'm showing you here, in the other two scenes, with snow in these examples, the water, and there are other conditions where this can be true, the water is darker than the surroundings. So we're going to do a painting of each of these vernaculars today, trying to ensure that there's a difference. But what is important here is we need to have a visual contrast between the subject, a puddle with a reflection, and the context. There needs to be a value contrast so that we can see the puddle. And it can happen in two ways, lighter or darker. Zooming in on this, looks like New York City or somewhere thereabouts, image, we see the bridge reflected in the scene. If we look at values in this scene, we find that, and break it down into just three, values being a very important component part of any painting, we find that the darkest is the bridge and a good portion of the water, the lightest, the snow, and the medium, some parts of the water, bridge, and background. Three different values. If we were to aggregate, the snow is the lightest, the water is the darkest in combination with the bridge, and the background is the middle. So we're assigning values to the painting. That is also true on the ones we've just looked at, that we have three values. Medium surrounding, lighter for the water, darker for the trees. Medium for the surroundings, lightest for the water, reflecting the light sky, and darkest for the trees. So keeping those value pieces in mind, we're going to tackle a couple of different paintings today. We're going to start with this scene where the water is only slightly darker than the surroundings, but in fact darker. And we'll talk through the composition of this in a few minutes, but the scene is interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, if the entire scene were busy, as these branches and trees are, it would be less interesting. What is very helpful in most paintings, and certainly the ones we'll do today, is to having some areas of quiet visual rest so they're not so busy, so that we end up appreciating the contrast between the calm and the busy. But in this scene, we essentially have the three values we've talked about. Very light sky and snow, medium for the background, and darkest for the trees where they're showing. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move. It'll be the first painting we do today, but we'll look also at a second painting. In this case, turn it the right side up, we end up with the dark surrounding. This is the puddle, and we do not see the source of these tree reflections. But theoretically, with only slightly darker trees, we have the darkness for the trees and the reflection, medium for the surroundings, and medium dark. In this case, the trees and those are pretty close together. And in the evening light, the reflection of the pond strongly. And we're having to imagine, in this case, by zeroing in on the reflections, the subject of the day. We'll also do a painting similar to this one as part of this session. So let's talk about the first painting and how it might move forward. If we look at the painting, the placement of the horizon line is key, as it almost always is, if there is a horizon line. And in that case, we're going to do certain things. We're going to look at the scene, as I've done here, and estimate on the side about 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. We'll do the same for the top, 2, 3. So we know where those are approximately. Because we want the water scene to be sizable enough to be compelling and the focus of the painting, we are going to move the horizon slightly above the third so we can get a good sized pond in to the scene. So the way this would proceed would be to draw a straight line, as I've said, just slightly above the horizon line. Make sure it's straight to the paper or you'll forever notice that. Then we look at the remainder of sky and some background. In this case, I'm going to divide that remainder into thirds and make sure that the background pieces don't end up again being half and half, so that the forests that are in the background here are only 1/3 of that total amount of sky. Also, I'm creating, in this case, something different than the previous scene. At a 1/3 position, an opening at the horizon where there's nothing but snow meeting sky, so that there is a visual escape down the stream and out of the painting. And I'm also dividing the rest of the tree so that the tallest one, 1/3, resolves by not going straight out, becomes back down to be a mound. This ends up creating a line of force pointing in. The next one is just 2/3 of this height for the total height. And they change in their height and drop down and resolve at the end. So we end up with a general location for trees. Next comes the pond. Drawing a line straight across. What we want to create in this scene is mystery, where the pond disappears behind other things. Mystery is created pretty simply by just drawing a shape and having the line disappear, so there is an angled, sharp line leading you off. Mystery. Draw the edge, point back, and the line, so that the pond goes behind that scene. And we keep doing these little pillows and additional pillows, point in, pillows. In this case, we'll have the stream lead off to the left and push further into the front. 2/3 of the way across the opening. 1, 2, 3, maybe just a bit further. I have here a kneaded eraser. Once I've drawn my lines, have my pillows for snow and my general location of pond, I'm going to lift it by first kneading the eraser, and so it gets lighter and doesn't show so much graphite, and pick up the loose graphite. Not pressing too hard, I want to still see the lines, but anything that might be loose on the surface from the pencil is removed at this time. So next step is to think about beginning the painting. We won't put the trees in for right now. We'll do the background and foreground. I'm going to suggest that we take a flat brush, but before we dive in with the flat brush, I'll mention that we'll do primarily today round brushes of various sizes. So from maybe a 10 or a 12 down to a 2. We'll be using them primarily, but we do occasionally, when we have big areas, use the 1/2-inch flat brush. Pure water, pretty important, and pretty important to be careful. What I usually do is dump the water in the middle of the paper so it's not running off the brush, and then move up, and I'm going to go right to the horizon line. That's over trees and all of the sky. And so I'm pushing down medium pressure, not way down, not on the tip, but medium pressure, so I can keep an accurate line on the horizon. We'll see how accurate I am today. And I'm keeping a finger as a little brace on the paper, so when I'm doing accurate things, I have a little more control. Now the rest of this can be done really simply. And I'm going to have the handy second tool in my hand, the handy folded paper towel, which is one of the tools, and any extra water at the edge I'm going to pick up. I'm going to leave it sit for just a minute while I mix some paints. I put the blues on a separate little clean um, yogurt cover here, and I'm going to mix them with a brush, but as a reminder, we're making circles up to the size of a silver dollar. We're rolling the brush and we're using ample water. And in this case, we're doing sky, and we've noticed that the overall painting, seen previously, is pretty light. So we don't have to have a lot of color. That means thin paint. We're opting for the end of the spectrum where we have 1 and 2% milk. So, and I'm mixing more than one puddle of 3 different paints. So I have some different versions to go to. So we'll have already at the beginning richness in the painting. It's been setting into the surface. I want to make sure there are no real bubbles. Let it run back from the bottom edge just a bit. And back to our key brush. Now, one thing that's always true is that there is a gradation of value from darker to lighter. In this case, I'm going to put the darker version, the whole milk version, to be tested. Not quite enough pigment, so we'll add a little bit more. The whole milk version, that's a little better. We're going to start. Okay, we are leaving it wet. We've painted both the trees and the sky, and we've added 2 or 3 different colors of blue. We've moved from darker to almost white. And so our eye is going to end up heading towards the light. There's a direction of movement. I've now mixed and will use some 2 or 3 of the browns. There's a burnt sienna, there's a burnt umber, there's a quinacridone gold. Very interesting and nice color as well. So we are going to have those at hand. And while the paper is still damp, we're going to do something of the quieter color first. We're going to drop it in to that zone where we've identified we want trees. Beside it, a different color already. And I'm just doing a little tabbing. This is called charging. And I'm just doing little groups of dots so it starts to expand and runs on its own. And back to the original cooler color. Stronger near the horizon line in the center at the 1/3 position so that the focus becomes stronger. And lighter, stronger at the bottom, lighter at the top, warmer at the top. I now moved into quinacridone gold. So we have on this little section alone 3 different colors. And then quieter as we move to the outside and lighter. So just like the sky moving from dark to light, we have this little hill moving from dark to lighter. And then we can come in and get something closer to heavy cream and do a smaller section of it and drop in just a few additional sections. We want to not let the other side of the tree realm go too long here. So we'll do the same. Quieter, darker. When I drop water on the painting, I pick it up strategically with just a small piece of the paper towel. And I'm forever dropping paint into my paintings. I tend to work pretty quickly. And I'm moving purposely from one color to the next until I get color on the entire area of trees. And I'm getting lighter without adding paint at the outside edge. So again, the focus stays near the center. And I have the opportunity to come back into this heavier cream piece, doing a little cluster at that location. If it's ever too much, as we've seen in previous things, cleaning the brush, you can pick up paint with that brush and put it on the paper towel to get it to be just the value that you're looking for in that location. And notice because it's wet, we have a bit of soft upper edge running. We can do a little bit of dotting into that so that the edge is even softer. I'm not adding paint, nor is this very wet. It's a thirsty brush, so we're creating a soft upper edge. then move in another little cluster. So we end up with the trees happening with a soft upper edge. This is the time to use the hair dryer, and I would like to suggest that we start 18 inches or so, and maybe on the low speed. For this scene, the next thing we'll be doing is with the same blues and color scheme, and with a mid-size round brush, we're going to wet the paper. And I do turn my palette so I can get comfortable and be accurate. I have a little purple on this brush that'll add only to the interest of the painting ultimately. And I'm going in and I'm going to check to make sure I don't have it too dark or too light. The darker paint in this case will be at the bottom edge, but we'll start by putting just a little paint down and more water. So we're going to paint just as the sky, paint into water. One has to be careful not to go over the edges. So accuracy is important. Hand down, firm grip, medium pressure, follow the line, be accurate. Don't wet beyond the line. And follow any lines that you put down previously, those little points going in, and the rest. Then you can be wild and crazy. Water. And this other little mystery piece going around that point. Water. And I'm going to turn the paper one more time so that I can follow this line. But notice what I'm doing is I'm putting my hand down to be accurate, putting medium pressure and following the edge. Those little triangular points are really key to understanding. And back we go to our blue paint. Again, we're going to pick a pretty dark edge, so we're going into heavier paint, moving it beyond just whole milk. In this corner, adding yet a different color of blue into that corner and dropping it. And as we moved into the painting, painting water, generally I'm going horizontal on my strokes, long strokes overlapping. And before long I'm going to turn the painting here. We've got a good beginning. To make it more accurate and give me more control, I turn it over, clean my brush, back to my paper towel, and I'm going to go across in the wet paint with different versions of color and from edge to edge. Horizontal lines. And so the water, as we've said, not unlike the sky, is going from light to dark. Water, almost no paint. Almost no paint. And we'll come back and tease this if it isn't exactly to our liking. Oh, I ended up painting the snow. We'll have to take that back. We'll show how remedies can happen. And here's where I'm to be painting the sea. So upside down, a bit of a mystery. Here we go. Here's where we're painting the water. I was wondering why that was looking a little funny. Into the water. And we'll show you a fix, an opportunity to show a fix. Because I painted snow and not water for a bit. Easy enough to do, especially when upside down. Horizontal lines on the water. And darker than the snow, for sure. And should we need it, we can drop paper towel just to lift this edge just a bit to take a little bit more of the paint off. So we have dark moving all the way to light on the water. Turning it back again, because I made an error and painted some of my snow, gives an opportunity to use my scrubbing brush. This is pure water now coming in, and even though we got a lot of this snow up, we want to go back closer to white. Pure water, lots of water, and medium pressure, as I'm fond of telling students. And carefully press and lift. We're getting back closer to the white that we're after. Okay, So that's essentially the water for now. We will next do the dryer again for the water. So paint sky, dry. Paint water, dark to light, dry. Reminder, this water is darker than the surroundings. So our next step, with the smaller of the round brushes, we're going to separate the parts in the snow using the lighter of the blues, not the dark ones. And we're going to do that. These are two pieces. That's a little hill of snow and that's another hill. The way to make this hill stand out is to turn it over and with the hill behind it, paint that hill. Demonstration happening. And with a brighter color preferably, a little too bright and a little too much paint. So off it goes. We lift. We create an outline, but then we create a little bubble. And I don't go in that paint, I just work on the absolute edge to soften it. I'm not trying to paint the snow, I'm trying to separate the parts. And I might add just a little of the other blue. Always can lighten if it gets to be too much one color or it gets to be too dark. And what we're doing is softening the upper edge so just that edge shows. And we're checking ourselves. It's a little too strong, so we're going to make the brush into a thirsty brush and pick up paint. So the separation became a little bit too strong. We're going to do the same thing again by this guy. Remember, not just outline, but to create a bubble. And then we're working on the outside of the bubble to fuzz the line and blend it off. Now we have a separated part. We're going to do it again in this location. And it's not just an outline, but it's got a bubble. And we're going to go around the edge of the bubble. So it's starting to work. And it's a bit brighter by choice in the blues than the water. Outline, expand, clean the brush so it's thirsty and only tease the outside edge. We're going to do it again. Line, bubble around the outside edge so it disappears. What we're making sure of is that this exterior edge is softened and disappears totally. We're missing a little paint that goes into that notch, so we can do that at this time and make sure that it's darker. So we're moving towards the whole heavy cream portion. And if it's too dark, it can be worked on pretty quickly. Around we go. And again, soften and disappear the edges. Okay. Looks like just one more to go back here. This a tiny guy and another one there. Edge, just to separate the parts. I'm looking at this guy, maybe it's a little bit anemic, so we're going to get towards whole milk just a little stronger so the division is clear. Getting some of that nice, bright, cheerful blue in the scene. In the background, we can drop in just a little bit of horizontal. This has to be very light with an emphasis on very, but we can end up dividing up this pure white space, which is again just a value, with something really light and can be lifted in part as that can for interest. Okay, so much for snow. We've done three things: sky, water, snow. Next, dry again. If a line begins to set up, which my eye is catching, we need to get rid of the extra line. So it's a soft edge. So an opportunity to remind us of where we're headed. Again, we're now going to add a group of trees. We're going to make our own. Notice that we didn't end up doing goal posts where there's equal clumps of trees. This is essentially 1/3 of the area of that group, and this is essentially the 1/3 position on the paper, the biggest amount. So this worked pretty well, so we'll do something to replicate a number of trees that are near that. Note that the most prominent central tree does movement and curving, as does a couple of the others. One of them is dead. Other things we can take note. Note that they're not all equal sized, nor equal spaced. So all of those things are true, and that a number of them, but not all, leave the paper. On the paper, on the paper, off, off. So let's start with the big group. And we're going to give ourselves some clues. We're going to drop in a sizable tree. And I'm going to lead it into the scene. Let's not push too hard, nor make this too large, nor too small. So it's a sizable tree. And so the thing I do is make sure that it tapers so as it goes up, but it tapers not too quickly. So it's not a pyramid, it's a logical die. And so we end up going up. So this will be a slightly different scene. We're making it up as we do each time. So what I'm doing is doing sections. So let's do a branch. Section, turn, section, shorter section, shorter. And so we end up and then double lining it. And then at certain key locations, off go other branches. So we're just repeating that motif. One, turn, turn. Branches tend, as we all probably know, to do that. So we're creating Mr. First Tree. Have that one go behind the tree. So we're doing not all the branches. We're going to have this end up broken branch, which seemed to work on the last scene, and a little bit thicker at the bottom, and another broken branch. But this one's got 3 prongs on it. And then another branch that goes out just with a little bit of life left on it. This one has a branch that hangs down into this zone. So we're creating this frame with this tree for that setting. We're going to do it again. These will be to make that curve count. We'll make the next one straighter so we can go back to our straight edge device, whatever it be, a piece of paper or a ruler, and draw in a tree. Let's not make it quite as big as that tree. And draw in, let's make the spacing different and be closer. And we'll have this one curve just a bit and be friendly to that tree. And again, smaller. So we're ending up with a group. Odd numbers are the key thing, so we'll start thinking about that. 1, 2, 3. And we don't want a bigger space here that competes, so we want to fill up this space. Maybe there's a second, more sizable tree really close to this one. In this case, it leans out just a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have a little stump going up here, and a branch that cuts off the corner. Give yourselves some clues. We don't need to do all the branches. We need to get a sense of the composition. This little straight one will have a side shoot that goes up for a while and then turns. It's a different kind of tree. Who knows what kind it is. And then it has another branch that does that, as this one does, across. After a while, there'll be enough so that any individual one won't stand out so much, and it'll start to count. So we're beginning to see the composition. So far we have 4. That means we have license to have 1 more, should we want. Let's do a little small guy. All of these are kind of leaving the scene. We filling up that space. So this becomes a nice group. And we're going to get our shadows at this point by taking that trunk down. And we're going to have it go across that little piece of work. We're going to have the shadows come directly down, the reflection, sorry, to the viewer. So we'll give ourselves some clues of where those will be. And we need one more possibly. Let's have this tree come down a little closer to the ground plane. Those will be up. This one will be down just to the horizon. And that one will as well. Okay, maybe all of them. Into the snow. One more to go. This is the shorter one. It leans out. Divide that space in thirds. Up we go. Only a third into the scene. This is a small little tree. So now we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And maybe there's going to be a seventh to have odd numbers. But we can do that later, or we can do it now. Have it grow from the base of this guy and out and across. So we have ourselves a nice composition. While we're at it, we'll do the remainder. Remember, it's going to be 1/3 of that area. And less so much on reflection. So what we're going to do is drop in Mr. First Tree, and we'll lean it in towards the center. Have it curve just a bit, so it's not die straight. It has a forked existence. And it's going to be in odd numbers, but certainly not 7, so we're going to stick with 3. Off we go with a branch. Off we go with a branch. That branch crosses. Takes the corner out of play and doesn't let your eye totally leave the scene, as does that branch. So, small tree, leaning in, going only in the sky, 1/3 of the way into the sky, and ending. So we have a nice open piece of sky. So I created an arc, and I'm moving towards it. The outside edge wants to be erratic. Some of them go out and some are in. Then we're going to come even lower with the foliage and the texture. And some of these will hang right down even into the foreground here. 1, 2, and then here's the third one. Divide that into thirds, something close to this guy, and he leaves the scene at a 2/3 position. So the rule of thirds, as you can tell by my talking, is affecting a lot of this decision making. So we have a composition. The next thing is to have mixed the burnt umbers, the sepias, the indigos, and the dark colors, and use the smaller or the next to the smaller brushes as a place to go. One thing to keep in mind is, where does the light come from? In this scene, we have a darker edge and a lighter edge to the trees, the light coming from that direction. And in this case, we have light coming from this direction. So let's reverse it, just to show that that's possible. The next step then is to get your hand in a good position, having mixed something closer to heavy cream in these various paints. And there are several of them, including the indigo, that we'll now add, and maybe other dark paints. And so we'll start by a dark edge. On this edge, the lighter edge will be closer to me. So I'm starting with indigo near the bottom, an outline, and remember always to do the bubble and not waste quite so much of the paint. And up we go into that little shelf. I went now to another color next to it, burnt umber. Out we go and up we go. Next step, rinse the brush, make a little bit less paint, and pull it down so there's a lighter edge. And if it's not quite enough, you can make the brush even thirstier and pick up some of that paint so we get a thinner edge. So remember, as we've said in earlier sessions, the brush is both a mop and a paint delivery system. If the edge is too strong, we can feather it by just a few strokes. And it's a great time to do it when it's wet. So, off we go, back to our indigo on the upper edge. But I'm going to reduce the value of this one key tree as I move up. I'm moving to brown and a slightly lighter value so that the dark is near the bottom. And this is where we have strong indigo, maybe on both sides, a little bit of additional darkness. full-throated color. As we move up, a little of that, but it gets lighter and changes its color and has more of the light, which is likely to be up there on the top of the trees. I'm moving now to another brush. We said we would move to other brushes and introduce them as they went along. These are the riggers, which have this longer, thin brush, the ones that make the lines. And so we have a chance, because we want some lines for branching, to start thinking about that. Putting my hand down carefully, making sure it's not wet, making sure that the angle of the brush stays the same in this case. The angle doesn't change. And then I pull the brush. I can use this brush to create those branches with the same kind of stroke. Movement, turn, move, turn, and branch. All the branches, of course, have to touch. If we didn't get it quite dark enough, we can add extra lines in. And if we didn't get it quite dark enough, we can make it extra dark and instantly lighten it. So I think you're beginning to see how the trees work. We'll do a couple of trees, then I'll move the painting forward and we'll move on to other aspects of the painting. But let's do a bit more so that you're more cognizant of the technique of painting trees. This goes across and it's dark, branches, branches, behind. So we get the issue of perspective. We have all the browns and so on at our command. Darker edge on the upper side, keeping in mind where the light is coming from, but lightening as we go to the top. Too dark up there, lift again, and lighten it. So we don't end up having this and that compete with each other. I'm purposely using more of the browns as we move in turn to this part, because the browns are warmer and they're more easy on the eye. We have a little dead branch here to work on, back with a little more indigo so it's nice and strong with the brown, so it's got both things going on. And follow the line directly and then make it look even better than the original pencil drawing. Teasing those parts. And in we go. If it's too equal, I'm going to have this hang down and put a branch off. Okay. And we said we'd have branches nice and thin. Noticing how thin these guys are, but only can happen if you reduce the amount of paint on the rigger and lift as you go towards the end. Lift. We're going behind that guy and adding some additional texture. I'm doing several at the end, and they get smaller as they go out. Stopping too soon, so it looks like a dead tree and not full enough branched. Each time, even though I'm doing it quickly, it'll be slower for you, I'm making sure that I connect with the one in front of it. I have, after a certain few thousand trees, some greater assurance that they'll connect. Darken that guy just a bit, and it goes a little bit far, needing something warm and interesting. This goes too far without a branch. So it takes just a while. But I think you're getting the hang of how that works. Let's do one more on this side so it's framed. Then I'll come back to you with the full trees in a few minutes. Dark, starting at the bottom, starting with the darkest, keeping our eye there. This one has a little sprout at the bottom and another little sprout, which often happens to wetland looking trees. When I go across the tree, I usually jump it to make sure that there's a follow through so that there's a believability going across the trunk, even though that trunk will be darker shortly. And again, turning it so that it's at best advantage for you to put your hand down and do the strokes. And one wants to think of this as fun, not laborious. It's a big part of the success of the painting to have this. And I'm noticing that this tree will have some reflection. So we're going to show you a system. It'll have some reflection in the piece of water below us here. And I'm going to share how that's done as well, with some accuracy. And I'm starting at the outside tip. My preference would be to do it as I'm doing currently, work from inside to the outside, so that you can be sure that you have the control. Running out of paint, we need to go add just a bit more paint. Okay, and before we leave you for a minute, I'm going to add this one more piece to show how it begins to frame that center. Nice and dark, and remember that's totally an outline so far, so I'm making my bubble. Then I'm changing my color and going beside it, and going lighter as I go to the top, knowing that I have my trusty paper towel at hand to assure that that happens. Okay, almost there. Darker. We might go back to our indigo for a piece of this edge to really add some power to it. And if you do that while the tree is wet, just like in the sky, it'll end up producing what you need. Off we go. Looking pretty good. And it's amazing how this darker value, we have 3 values in this painting as we have in the others. The lighter sky, the medium values, and the dark. In this case, the trees are the dark, and the reflections will be on the order of the trees, a bit darker. Darken that edge if it lightens up on us, but lighten it as it goes up. The next step then is to reinforce the difference between the snow and the water using similar browns, but not quite as dark. So we're going to have several versions of brown around. And at the edge, or the joint, we're going to add just a little piece. And they get thicker and thinner as they move around. But there is an exaggeration of that joint. And it might go into the water just a bit, and it moves, especially on the ones that are closest to you, not the upper edge, and the edges that might be visible for the 3-dimension. And we can thus exaggerate the perspective of how this, back here they want to be lighter and thinner, but visible, and move, and some of them even interrupted. Not a lot to do, but some. In we go into that zone, and if it's just a straight line, we look for an opportunity to increase and move it in, and do another little piece sticking out from something beyond. Again, all the stuff that faces you as you're looking towards the scene, but not the upper edges of those guys. So it puts this in perspective. We want to dry it quickly, which we'll do. So trees in. Next step, back to our blues. And in the same area, but now dry, we're going to add just above that brown, and going over the brown in some cases, little pieces of darker blue. Preferably not sky blue. This is more in the shadow zone, so the cooler blues, cobalt, and other. It's a subtle but pretty important piece of making this look like snow. Okay, we can try again. Now it's taken all of that work to get to the subject of the painting. That's reflections. Reflections will be where we've begun the drawing, and reasonably dark, but not the same darkness of the trees. The reflections, I'm going to suggest, are slightly lighter. We can make them equal at the beginning, or not, but we can always lighten them with the paper towel. And we have them pre-drawn by having extended them down. And at a certain distance above that position, we're going to have that guy stick out. And we're going to have something else stick out. So we need some branches in order to make it believable. And we're doing it slightly lighter. This ended up being a little thicker, so we'll thicken that up. This ends up being, as we move to the edge of the paper, again, we want to be thinking a little lighter. And this guy, and he's leaning, it will make him lean. And then there's a branch. And we'll darken this back because it got a little too light. And we're going to have some branches coming down in, and some branches coming down in. So much for that guy. What we haven't done yet is extend this guy down, and we're going to see him coming across here and here. And we're going to see this guy coming there. It's going to go all the way out to here. And so we're going to end up with some texture from that guy. But he's further back, so it'll be even lighter. And that seam. With the same brown, there we go. Nothing on the snow. Trunk. 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 And lighter. Moving out from the trunk. And we have the opportunity, and we'll use it in a second, just to lighten these slightly. One tap. We can always come back and reinforce darkness if we decided we've taken too much away. And these also have to touch. And they need to be not symmetrical at the end and have quite a lot of branching. Okay. So you get a sense of that tree coming down as a reflection. Next opportunity is to put in, not in the middle, but at a 1/3 position from that tree to that tree, a little bit of grass for scale. It's way back there, so it's subtle and it's reflecting in. Put a little bit here, we reflect. We add a few grasses here and there. When we're doing grasses, we do a little clump and then we feather. So they stretch out. We reinforce that edge just a bit by feathering. And so we're doing it around the focus. Just a few pieces of additional grass coming into the scene. So some additional texture, some of that's off the scene. Could easily get too many, so be gentle. So we need the calm center, and yeah, so last thing, we might go for something orangey or reddish, something really brighter, but in a lighter version to reinforce the center focus. So I'm going to put a little red into that zone, and I'm going to take water and just spread it slightly. So we're using color as a way of reinforcing the focus. And a real thin version of that color, very thin, happens on a few spots on the snow. So it pulls it into the scene. So there's something what is called color jump. If we find ourselves a mat, so we can take a look at this, and it probably needs a bit more touching, but it's in the ballpark of what it needs to be. So there we have the first of two paintings with reflections. This one again celebrating a darker pond with a lighter snow field around it, and quite a simple tree sky background behind it. We have a painting, smooth, calm, lots of texture, and reflections. We'll move now to a second painting where the surrounding is darker. And the center is darker, and the surrounding is darker, and the center lighter. So the other version of reflections.